Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Chrissy Pfeiffer, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turned multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. What's up, warriors? Welcome back to another episode of the Suburban Warrior Podcast. So, who's hungry? Who raised their hand out there? I know, I am. I am really excited about my guest today because we're going to be talking about something that I know I love and everyone else loves, and that is food. But we're talking about it in such a fun and special way. So, let me introduce Michele Di Pietro. She is an entrepreneur, chef, culinary consultant, food writer, cookbook author, blogger, and creator of Mangia with Michele, the expression of her lifelong passion for Italian ingredients, foods, recipes, cultures, and traditions. She was raised in an Italian-American family in southern New Jersey, where her culinary education began with a collection of relatives as teachers in a household where food and cooking were central, daily household activities. With both Sicilian and Abruzzese, I got it right, roots, Michele experienced distinctive regional cuisines of Italy in an American setting while growing up and fell in love with the act of giving of herself through preparing food for others. On Sunday mornings, Michele could be found in the kitchen cooking eggs with her mother as young as age 5. And many an afternoon was spent with her grandmother making traditional Italian comfort foods, including fresh pasta, gnocchi, and homemade gravy. Michele is a graduate of Georgetown University and the restaurant school at Walnut Hill College, started out her professional career as a certified public accountant at a top New York City firm, but eventually found her true calling as she worked and traveled in Europe, experiencing some of the world's finest cuisines. Michele, I am so excited to bring you on the podcast to tell us your story. So welcome.
Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And what I didn't get to in your bio is that you also have written a book, and I'm excited to talk about that as well. But before we do, let's get into telling us a little bit about your story, because obviously you went to Georgetown and you started out as a CPA. Yeah. And so how did you get where you are now? How did this happen?
You hit a lot of good points in your introduction. So yes, I grew up in an Italian-American family. So food was always just a part of my life. And I always loved to eat. So I think that's why I always loved to cook, and I had a stay-at-home mom. So I was by her side, like really, really young, like learning how to cook. And I had like Italian grandmother who was making homemade pasta. So, I was in the kitchen, I was doing stuff with my hands. And actually, when I was a little kid, I used to say like, I wanted to be a chef when I grew up, but that was when I was like really little.
But that's so fun. That's where sometimes when you're really little, what you speak is what you feel, right? It comes from the heart and it's your passion. So I love that.
And I just never really considered, even though as much as I loved cooking and everything, I never really considered food as a career. Maybe because like nobody in my family was really in that field. Although I did have cousins that owned a bakery, but that was kind of like a different thing. But I also was always really into academics. So I was like a super, super studier. I was like that person who always had to get an A and stuff. And I always really I was very ambitious in school. I always really wanted to do well in school. And that meant, kind of getting educated, going to college, doing something that was like more quote unquote professional.
Sure.
So I ended up becoming an accounting major. I knew I wanted to major in something in business. I wasn't really sure. Accounting was something that I could do. I liked it enough. I knew it was a good field to go into. It was pretty certain that you would get a job after graduation, which was obviously very important. I didn't come from a family. I came from a very, I'd say middle class to lower middle class family. Yeah. So getting that big job after graduation was kind of key. And It was a great opportunity for me, as a young 22-year-old, really getting a lot of great experience with big companies and like people who were very senior in companies at a very young age and having a lot of responsibility. But my heart wasn't in it. And it was only like when I found myself in a career that I wasn't passionate about, really on almost every level, that I started to think of like, wow, like what else is out there? Because I'm so young. I have a lot of years ahead of me working. Like, what is, why do I think that I have to stay in this field? But it was a very gradual decision. I mean, I think I got jaded by the whole thing. Frankly, like a year and a half, 2 years in is when I kind of realized I wasn't that into what I was doing. But you don't graduate from Georgetown with a bunch of student loans from a family that doesn't have a lot of money and then think like, well, I'm just going to go to cooking school. Like you just don't do that. That doesn't happen.
Right. So how long did it take you to finally make that move?
5 years.
Okay.
In total. 5 years I worked in that field. So I would say probably about 3+ years. But the big thing for me is, I was working in New York City, which was a really big deal. And it was great. It was fun. I realized something was missing. This is what I was referring to earlier, but I wasn't ready to make like a big leap. But I had this kind of realization like, wow, I work for this international company. Maybe I should like look into their international work opportunities. Oh. So that's what I did. And I ended up, I thought like, let me try and get a position, like do an exchange in Italy. Cause I had, I was Italian. I had been studying Italian recreationally. I'd studied at Georgetown. And I thought, let me try and get a position, do an exchange in Milan. Cause we had offices all over the world, just because Milan's the business center of Italy. So that didn't work out, but they came back to me and said, we have something for someone on your level in Geneva, Switzerland. And I'm like, oh, what language do they speak there? I didn't even know. I didn't know anything really else which was French. And I didn't know a word of French, but it didn't really matter because, I worked 100% in English with British and American expats and clients. But so I did that. So when I was 25, I was still in public accounting, still with my company. I basically did a 2-year international exchange, moved to Switzerland, was there for 2 years. And really, it was such a life-defining experience for me on so many levels. It gave me exposure to so many different cultures, so many different foods, just so many wonderful things. The people, even like the people that I worked with that were, hardcore business people, still, they would sit there and they would talk about food. Like everybody knew about food. And like, it wasn't like all they ever talked about was sports. People talked about what they're cooking, what they're eating. Cause you're in Italy, you're in the middle of Europe.
Yeah.
Working with Italians and French people and Swiss people, and food was just such an important part of their culture. And then I got the opportunity to travel like so much during those 2 years. But after those 2 years of because it was 2 more years of working in public accounting, I realized I'm done. They wanted me to stay another year. And the expectation was that I would go back to New York, after this experience and like bring back this international experience back to New York. But I just knew I couldn't do it any longer. And I wanted to leave while I was still doing a really good job at work, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
So I came back to the States after 2 years. That was 5 years in total of public accounting. I quit my job. I moved back in with my parents in South Jersey, and I enrolled in cooking school in Philadelphia. And I did a complete 180. And frankly, I never looked back, and I loved it. Like I loved cooking school. And I always say, like, if I had unlimited funds and I didn't have to work, I would go back to cooking school again. Like this was a while ago because I've been around a while. So this was, the Food Network was out, but it wasn't like it was just starting to be what it is today, meaning like the celebrity chefs were kind of just starting, and, being in the food business was considered cool. Like that was all sort of about to start. I went to cooking school because I figured I wanted to be in the food industry in some aspect. And I thought maybe I could combine my business background with food. I knew restaurants weren't my calling. Like the idea of working on a line in a restaurant, making like hundreds of dishes every night, that scared me at my core.
Yeah.
And it gave me anxiety just thinking about it. But I thought, well, maybe I'll have to do that for a little while. But what I think I want to do is maybe open up my own gourmet food store, like an Italian specialty store. Because when I lived in New York City, I fell in love with the concept of prepared foods and just all these wonderful foods that people could just take home and eat. And this is before it was everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's like, that is definitely, I feel like how things have evolved.
That is how right. So this is before they really were like, before it was, but I thought loosely going into cooking school, that's kind of what I thought. And I didn't end up doing that, but I did end up working in, a grocery store for most of my career. I worked in restaurants for a short while. And then there was this company opening up like a few miles from where I lived called Fresh Fields Whole Foods Market.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what the heck that company was because I had just moved back into to the country. And also it wasn't what it was today. You know, I mean, it had obviously had been around, but it was just, I think, sort of new on the East Coast-ish. And I didn't know anything about the company. All I knew is they had a prepared foods department. So I applied, I got a part-time job there. And then when I graduated from cooking school, I went full-time and I loved it. It was just fun. It was very interesting. It was fun. And me bringing this whole other skill set to that job, like from being in the public accounting field, just like that whole right brain, left brain, which has actually been very useful to me my entire life.
Right.
But, like there was just lots of opportunities to help out in the department on things besides food, like just help like with keeping the financial records of of the department and helping with ordering and helping with a lot of other things. So I quickly moved up in the company, just organically. It just happened. I really wasn't aiming to. I worked in stores for about 2.5 years in both New Jersey and Philadelphia. And then I moved into a corporate position, which was something that morphed into essentially like a food position, more like a regional chef position. It didn't, I was a merchandiser for a while. I was on the road, like opening up stores with our team. It was a lot of travel. But anytime any like creative food project came up on our team, I was the one that kind of just jumped in and like, I want to do that, because I had just changed my entire career to be into the food business. I wasn't as interested in the merchandising or the corporate, the financial side, the HR part. Like I really was interested. For me, it was all about the food. It was all about the creativity. It was about the flavors and the recipes. So that eventually morphed into like a regional R&D, research and development position, where I was working with, all the teams, and it was focused on the recipes and food. And then eventually that got me back up to New York City. I was in the New Jersey, New York area. I had moved down to the DC area. Really, I was in a good 7 years into Whole Foods. I moved back up to New York. So 10 years after the day I left New York to head to Switzerland, almost to the day I moved back to New York City, and then in the Northeast region, which, I mean, I essentially got my dream job. It was akin to like a culinary director. It was 100% focused on culinary concepts and developing food and menus and mini restaurants and eateries within the store, and like working cross-functionally, like within the region. And Whole Foods was a very like region-specific company at that point, but meaning like each region kind of operated independently as its own company. So we had a lot of like creative leeway to do what we wanted to do. And I did that for a really long time. I mean, and in retrospect, I think I probably stayed too long, for sure, like 3 or 4 years too long, but life's not perfect. And I just loved what I was doing. I didn't focus as much on like me moving up on the company. I was just focusing on like, I really enjoyed what I was doing. Yeah. But at some point you look at your life and you're like, okay, I still have a lot more years of working. I'm not going to be at this company until I retire. It's time to make a move, So I did. And I went to work for a small New York City based vegan, organic food and juice company, which was completely different. I mean, it was like 7 units. It was a completely different small company as compared to like the corporate giant of Whole Foods Market that I was in. It was just vegan. It was organic. It was juice focused. It was coming up with like plant-based foods, gluten-free, all that kind of stuff. But it was very short-lived. It was a small company, that one of those companies that was purchased by, an equity firm and then sold to another equity firm. So all of us got laid off the next day. So I think I was there. I was there less than 18 months. And in retrospect, it was kind of a weird experience, but it was a good experience for me because I had been in a company for so long. Like I was at Whole Foods over 15 years. Then I went to this company where I was there about 16 months. And we all saw the writing on the wall. We knew the company was going to be sold and we were probably going to lose our job. So I started to think like, well, what's my next move going to be after this? And, I had a conversation with someone who at the time was like a mentor to me. And I remember talking to him and I'm like, if I had the guts, I might just like quit my job. I ended up getting laid off. So that was, whatever. But at this point I was like, maybe I would just quit my job.
There you go. That's the universe taking care of it for you.
Go out on my own and become a consultant. He's like, well, why don't you just do that? I'm like, well, I don't know. It's just too scary. I mean, that's just something that you say and you think about, and he's like, Michele, no one's going to make a better food consultant than you. And this is someone who was my CEO. I worked for him. He was like very experienced and well-known in the industry. And so someone I respected a lot. And I'm like, okay, this guy knows what my capabilities are. If someone like him is saying this to me, like maybe I should actually consider this. So when I got laid off, I took a couple months off. It was summertime. I set up an LLC. And then in September of 2015, I started It's All About the Food LLC, which is what I still do. And it's independent culinary consulting. And where I offer services to an eclectic lineup of food businesses. It could be a small fast casual company or a retail brand that is like looking to come out with different items to sell in, like, say, a prepared foods department. A recent project was with a small Italian restaurant that was doing like their whole menu, all their recipes. And there's a lot of services that I could offer because I've been in the industry for so long, but I primarily get hired for like the creative side of the menu, whether it's food trends research, like re-engineering a menu, recipe development, whether it's and it's commercialization of recipes. So we're not talking about home recipes. This is all food service. This is all developing food on some level that is going to be sold to the public. So whether it's something that's going to be like a restaurant where the items are made to order, or maybe something that's going to be made in a commissary in like a 200-pound batch, various food projects.
So what about, so you started your own company, you do all this consulting, and then now you have Mangia with Michele. And I know when I look on Facebook and I look on Instagram, like my mouth just like instantly waters at all these delicious dishes that you're cooking. So tell us a little bit about Mangia with Michele and sort of like, what your audience is. Sure. And then and then I want to ask you about the cookbook.
No, and that's the next transition, is because I became an independent consultant, and I'm sure a lot of people out there can relate to this. There are peaks and valleys in terms of how busy you are. And it started out very, very strong, where I got just organically client after client after client. And the first 2 years I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like I can just continue. I could just do this for years. I could just do this, but then it slowed down. So then it became a lot about like marketing myself and trying to get more clients. But it was during one of those like valleys and those times when I wasn't really working that much that I started to think about, maybe I need a side hustle. Maybe I need to like focus on something else. And that's kind of where Mangia with Michele came up. So I had always had like a second Instagram account, which actually was called In Abruzzi, which we're talking about. In Abruzzi si mangia bene, which is it's just an Italian phrase that basically says, in Abruzzi, you eat well. And it was just a fun second account in which I just for fun would post about my overall passion for everything Italian, essentially. It wasn't like strategic. It might be about my travels. It might be a funny quote. It might be something I ate, something I cooked. But at some point I thought, let me become a little bit more strategic about this second account. I changed the name to Mangia with Michele, which was just more accessible to the world, as opposed to this weird Italian phrase.
And it sounds good.
Yeah, there's some good alliteration that has my name in it. There's, and it sounds fun. And I started to become a little bit more strategic. And I thought maybe it would be great to put more time into this, grow a following, and maybe one day I could work with brands and have some supplemental income to my consulting practice. That was my only thought in the beginning. So I started posting recipes and stories and other things. But what I wasn't expecting is like, it ended up taking on a life of its own. And it did so quickly. It didn't even take that long. And I made so many connections with so many different people that kind of blew me away. And I started to become more and more passionate about Mangia with Michele, more and more passionate about creating content for the home cook, completely different than food service. And I connected with people that were doing stuff like me, like other like bloggers, well, full-on bloggers or just social, influencers. I also connected a lot more with people in the Italian American community, which was really great. But the most important connections were the ones I was making with the people out there that were making my recipes at home.
Yeah.
And that would send me messages like, oh my God, what you wrote just really like touched me at my core. And it just was so reminiscent and nostalgia, like it invoked this nostalgia in me for the way that I grew up. Or that recipe, like I just served that with my family and I made it with my kids, like so many great connections and stories like that. I found that I really loved it. I mean, I'm a people person. I love connecting with people. So well, it's really amazing too, because I mean, even just going back to when you were talking about when you were in Switzerland, and everyone was talking about food, right? I mean, food is what connects us all, whether it's, it brings us together, it connects us to our past, like with your grandmother and your family. It connects us to places we've been, places that we want to go that we haven't even been to. So, it is that central element that, especially if you're a people person and you're connecting with people on social media, but then
it's really about the recipes and the food and hearing how the food is being shared with people's family. And it's very energizing,
It's very energizing. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it really kept me interested in like doing more and more and more. So I started Mangia with Michele a little over 3 years ago. It was November of 2017. It was more than 2 years after I started consulting. And I realized somewhere like a year into it that my professional passions had totally shifted, meaning that I wasn't so interested in food service anymore. I've really been doing it like 20 years and I loved it for so long. And I still really do like it. But what I really, really love connecting with people like the home cooks. It's a different thing. I mean, they all fall under the umbrella of food, but like food service and food blogging, I would say are opposite ends of the spectrum within the food umbrella. It's a very, very different. Most people who end up doing what I'm doing now with Mangia with Michele, they don't have a professional background. They weren't, they didn't go to, and that's fine. They didn't go to cooking school and they don't have that kind of experience. But,
so you're all into, this connection with people and social media, and then quarantine happens, and so much of our connections go away. And I know
it's really awful.
It's awful. It was terrible. It's like almost been a year now. But I know that you were sort of stuck at home in your New York City apartment,
right?
And your wheels started turning once again. So tell us about.
And I've always, of course, and I say of course because I've always wanted to write a cookbook. And I say of course because almost anyone who's gone to cooking school and worked in the industry probably has as a pipe dream, like, one day I'll write a cookbook. Right. But I don't think I ever really, really wanted to do it that badly, because it wasn't like I came home after work and was working on my cookbook all these years of working many, many hours. But I always have these ideas. I have these like creative bubbles that are just sort of out there. And one of the ideas I had was soup versions of food, different non-soup foods. And I had like done a couple of recipes to that topic, like over the couple of years prior with Mangia with Michele. And I had just made a eggplant tahini soup at home, which I'm like, it's kind of like a baba ganoush soup. This is, I think, in February or March.
Okay.
So I didn't make that soup thinking this is going to be one of the first recipes in the cookbook. Right. I just kind of made it. And I'm like, that's kind of fun. And I've done a couple of recipes like this. So I start writing on my phone, on my notes, I like ideas for other soupified soups. Although I wasn't using that word yet. I was using the term unlikely soups. And I was talking to another friend and, COVID and just all this time and really being like stressed out. And I just needed something else to focus on. So I'm like, maybe I'll do an ebook. And for me, an ebook, for whatever reason in my mind, an ebook was defined as a PDF of a small collection of recipes that I might be able to sell on my website once I get my website up and running, which, by the way, it's still not up and running.
So I love it.
Yeah, it's just, I've been struggling with that for some reason. And
there's no rules.
I know. I thought it would be.
There's no rules. There's no order. I actually love that you don't have a website yet. Like, who cares?
Well, I have a splash page, but
hey, that's great.
So many other like projects just keep coming in front of it.
Exactly.
So I started, and I also started just taking. I was taking pictures of the food myself, which of course I've been doing on social media for the past few years. But when you're taking pictures for a cookbook, like I would never think I could do that. But for an ebook, which was just going to be this PDF, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take the photos myself, back up. I don't consider myself a food photographer at all. Okay. Like I take all my photos with my phone. I've always been a back of the house kitchen girl, and like photography is one of those things I do want to improve, but I haven't done it yet. But in this case, I'm like, I'm just going to take the photos myself, because if I have to wait until I can afford a food photographer, I'll never do it. Everyone is doing all these other projects in COVID. People are starting cooking classes online. Everyone's starting all this stuff. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to just write these recipes and I'm going to do the pictures and whatever. So, and 10 or 12 recipes in my head just started becoming more. And then I'm like, maybe I'll do 30. And then I decided to do 31, just one for every day of the month. So I kept working on these recipes and the photos. And I didn't even like put a lot of pressure on myself. I could have done it a lot faster. I think the first recipe I did was in April. And then I did a bunch in I did a couple in May, I did a bunch in June, and I really finished them up in August. But it wasn't until I finished the recipes. Well, actually a little bit before I finished the recipes, I reconnected with the woman who was my website designer, who I had blown off for months. And we caught up on a phone call and I was like, oh, I'm working on a cookbook. This is what I'm doing. And she's like, oh, well, that sounds great. Who's designing your cookbook? And I said, well, I don't know. I didn't even know that was something that needed to be done.
Yeah,
so
you're like, wait, You're like, it's an ebook. It doesn't really need
I know.
a
I'm like, I
designer.
guess I am. I didn't even
Yeah,
really
yeah.
know that, that it needs to be done. And I think, and she's like, well, I've always wanted to do a cookbook. And I mean, she's been designing books and she's a wonderful graphic designer, but had never done a cookbook. And she had really wanted to do a cookbook. So long story short, we had a couple conversations. And so I hired her to do the design, but it was only really like a few weeks later when I finished the last recipe that I dug into what it would take to like do this book print on demand, which people had told me about print on demand. But we're talking early September.
Right.
And at that point, I was like, wow, there's still a lot more that I need to do. I'm going to, I have to hire this designer. I'm going to probably have to hire someone to do the index. But at that point, I had spent so much time and energy on the recipes, which I truly loved. I'm like, these are awesome recipes. I love most of the photos. I love the concept of this book. In for a penny, in for a pound, which is what my British friends say. So at that point, I was like, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get this into a printed cookbook, print on demand. Like I'd heard that Amazon did this print on demand service, but I'm like, that sounds like that would work for me. And I'm really going to try and get it out for this soup season, which, so again, this is early September. And I was thinking, maybe, can I get this out for the first week in November, which I didn't, but I got it out right after Thanksgiving. And at that point, it was just a huge project to manage. I mean, I still had a lot of writing to do. I had to really edit the recipes and educate myself on how recipes should be presented for a cookbook, which is just different than the way I've been writing recipes my entire life. Just the format and styling, really. But it still took a long time. And then there was the creative writing aspect of it, like the introductions to each of the recipes, the part in the front of the book, the dedicate. There's a lot of like different pieces. And there were tears.
I'm sure. I mean, listen, I think anytime we try something new, right? Like to your point, like you think you get into it and you're just thinking, oh, I'm going to write some recipes and take some pictures. And the next thing you know, you're like, wait a second, I need a designer. I need to index it. I need introductions. So it becomes this much larger,
bigger,
project.
And a lot of expense, which I wasn't really planning on. And not to mention all the expense that I had already spent on the ingredients, which is not immaterial. Like it's actually,
of course,
it adds up.
Of course.
But I just, at that point I was like, I'm doing but there was this realization sometime in early September that, oh my God, I'm self-publishing a cookbook. And that term self-publishing just didn't really come into my mind earlier on. And if that was really what I was thinking back in March and April, when the birth of this idea came together, I would have talked myself out of it.
Yeah.
I would have been like, self-publishing a cookbook, that's going to involve a professional photographer. I don't even know I have no idea how that works. There's marketing, there's printing. That's going to be really expensive. No. And I would have just stopped right there and I would have never have done it because I thought of it as a completely different animal in the beginning. And then it just sort of slowly morphed into something that was essentially a self-published cookbook. That's why it came together. Because I can definitely talk myself out of things very easily.
And I think that's what we all do. And I think that's such an important point is that you didn't overthink it. You just thought of something. You didn't, and you didn't really think about it at all.
Almost everything.
We all do. I mean, listen, I could tell you, like, I list on my hand 5 things right now that I'm overthinking at the moment when it comes to business or even anything personal. Like, we just overthink instead of just thinking about the next step and what is the next step I have to take and focusing on that and only that. We overthink about everything. So I love that you really weren't going there. And that's sort of what allowed you to now have a self-published book called Soupified. If our listeners haven't figured that out yet, it's Soupified. And it is basically the premise of the book is taking amazing traditional Italian meals, such as like chicken parm and, I think you just mentioned like an eggplant dish and eggplant parm, that sort of thing, and making them into soups, which are hearty, delicious, heartwarming meals to eat and to share. So now Soupified is available, right? On Amazon. Where is Soupified
it's actually available? So then, so I did the paperback and the digital ebook on Amazon, but I also did a hardcover through a company called Ingram Spark, which allows it to be available outside of Amazon.
Awesome.
It's not really in brick and mortar stores because we're just not in that world right now of book signings and stuff that I needed to even like kind of go down that road. It's really just I mean, it is in a couple of bookstores. Like there's a
Yeah,
couple
well, it's literally only been like 4 months since
but
you launched
I
it.
know, but if you actually Google Soupified, you can find the hardcover on a lot of digital platforms, but the paperback is only on Amazon. And
Okay.
Soupified, soups inspired by your favorite dishes. It is based on a lot of Italian American dishes, but it's not solely Italian American or Italian, because there's a bacon cheeseburger soup in there.
Oh my gosh, so good.
There's a crab cake soup in there. There's a Reuben soup, but then again, you have penne alla vodka, you have eggplant parm, there's 4 cold soups. There's caprese, prosciutto and melon. There's guacamole. There's Greek salad. There's 31 recipes. And yes, you kind of described it I very well in that it's like the weekend comfort food soups of your dreams. These are, I kind of joke and I'm like, these are not the chicken pastinas of the world. There's a lot of ingredients. They're hearty. They're meant to be the meal that you have, meals in and of themselves. And they're meant to be shared. Like each recipe makes a large batch of soup because it's the way I cook. You know what? I'm Italian American. I don't do anything small. Even though I live like alone in an apartment in Manhattan, I still don't do anything small. And anyone who knows me knows that they, has probably eaten food by me because I'm always giving food away. But you can always cut the recipes in half in any case. But it's a really fun, whimsical.
Well, you could probably cook them all and freeze some, right?
You absolutely can.
Yeah, which is awesome. And especially for busy moms that are, not looking to cook every single day. I think that's such a wonderful idea. I actually prefer recipes that are a little bit larger because I have a larger family, but I don't want to cook every night. So we're fine with leftovers, or I'm fine with going in the freezer and defrosting something. So I think that's brilliant that it's a larger recipe.
And there's a whole section in the front of the book on how to freeze or store the soup should you want to do that.
Oh, there you go. That's awesome. That's so wonderful. So, my gosh, I love the story of how, this is just such a great example of something wonderful coming out of this pandemic and quarantine. I also love the fact though that you really didn't start with the end in mind, because I think that's I think that's really important. I think, we all sort of think that we can control the outcome of whatever situation, but it's really about controlling the effort. And
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what we can do each and every day, right? We can control the effort that we put in, and, we can have an outcome in mind, but a lot of times we just don't know. So I love that you started it with not really knowing where you were going to end up. And, it's still in its infancy. It's only a couple months old that you have this amazing self-published book that I think, the recipes in it are just delicious, hearty, and oh so yummy. And, I love what you're doing also, because I do think that food is something so special that connects us all. It's really, it not only connects us to others, but it connects us to our own bodies, listening to what kind of foods our body responds to. So it's really about, when we eat, connecting with our living energy and our senses. And I think, what you're doing in your career is so tied to connecting people and ourselves. It's just awesome. Thank you so much, Michele, for joining us today. I want to make sure that everyone can find you and find your book. So I know Instagram is Mangia with Michele.
And it's, Mangia with Michele. And it's Michele spelled with 1 L.
Yes.
Which is the more unusual way. And Mangia with Michele. And then there's Mangia with Michele, again, with 1L.com. Okay. That's my website that is not ready yet, but there is one page there where you can sign up for my mailing list. And if you do, you will have access to 3 additional Soupified recipes that are not in the cookbook and not on my social media and nowhere else.
Awesome. I love that.
And then I'm also on Facebook under the same Mangia with Michele. And I am starting to work on a second cookbook.
Ooh,
which I do hope to go the traditional publishing route. So that's going to be a little bit different and a different kind of journey. So.
I love it. Absolutely. But why not, right? Start the next journey. And then you can find Soupified on Amazon.
Amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, or again, for the hardcover. But the hardcover really is available on so many other platforms. If you just Google Soupified, Soupified. Soups inspired by your favorite dishes.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And we will certainly have all of those links linked in the show notes. So make sure you check them out there. check out Soupified, start cooking some amazing, comforting recipes for yourself or your family. And don't forget to leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. We would love for you to subscribe, rate, and review, and tell us a little bit about your thoughts on this episode. So thanks so much for joining us, Warriors. We will talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.